All right. So again, Gary, thank you for joining me. So I have this bio that's actually on your website. I'm actually going to read this just directly from your website. So this is it. So G. Moore stepped away from teaching during the pandemic and chose to pursue his passion for poetry and storytelling. His debut poetry collection, Songs for the Cleveland Avenue Warriors, Songs from the Past, Present, and Future, published by Creative Onion Press, was followed up by Songs for the Cleveland Avenue Warriors, Reality and Fame, the childhood book series, What Daddy Do and What Mommy Do, and the Futuristic themed short story collection, The Wayward Home for Retired Superheroes, and More Astonishing Tales from the Hood. He is currently celebrating the publication of his debut Afrofuturistic themed novel, Bealz. How do you actually pronounce the name of the character?
You got it right.
Okay, Bealz, Prince of the Southside, published by Nightmare Press, available now for purchase, as well as the release of his spoken word album, I Used to Be a Superhero, produced by Rich Kern. All right, so
Bealz's head swims. He lurches to his hands and knees and vomits violently. His eyes water painfully as he struggles to adjust to the bright light. Sitting back on his haunches, he rubs furiously at his face, trying to clear his vision while his heart races in panic and his breath quickens. He just watched his mother kill Miss Penny with a touch. And something else had happened. Something in his mother had changed, and then she brought them here. Bealz knows where he is. He recognizes it immediately. He's seen this sky before. He'd smelled the air and felt the silken green golden grasses pressed down beneath them. This is the Encata, a dream world that can't possibly exist. It is supposed to be a mental trick, like the coping mechanisms the various DCFS appointed counselors had taught him to use over the years. A place to escape to when things got too hard out in the real world. But this is no dream. This is no subconscious escape, no break from reality. This is real. His mother has brought him home. That other place, the dingy little room they had just stepped from, the filthy alleyways, the crowded bus stops, Deshawn and Dakari and Miss Penny, and the hellishness of a life lived on the south side of Chicago. That was the dream. Bealz somehow knew it all along. Still, and despite the familiarity he feels here in his spirit, his body, and all his senses scream out in alarm, disoriented by the slightly different mix of gases in the air, the vibrant colors swirling through the grasses, and the stronger pull of the Encata's gravity. Everything is so much like Earth, but nothing is the same.
So actually, this question isn't on the ones that I gave you, but just for the audience who may not know what this is, what is Afrofuturistic? Uh, what is that genre?
That that genre specifically is the way that I like to describe it is is specifically that the scientific that sci-fi that fantasy genre, but it's presented the way it's presented is most specifically from an African American's uh, point of view, from our life. It's based on a particular life experience of a particular group of people. There is Afro futurist, um, but there's specifically an African futurist genre also, where that same genre is written from specifically Africans' point of view, we get this worldview of genre that is typically not inclusive of us. So it allows uh, that voice to be heard, and it allows that particular life experience to be presented. So it's nothing that should be seen as a barrier. It's just indicative of the point of view, the life experience that the writer is infusing into his story. Or
You know,
is
I'm trying to actually think about when was the first time I heard that term before, and I have a bachelor's in English and a master's in writing, and they don't tend to study genre fiction in universities. And so it wasn't there. I read a lot of Octavia Butler, but I don't remember it being used for her too. But when's the first time you heard the term Afrofuturistic used? Do you like have a concept of when it
Yeah,
was?
yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned Octavia Butler, because the first time that I actually heard anyone or any particular story or any particular writer or genre associated with it is through Octavia Butler. I was introduced to the genre through Octavia Butler, and hearing the term associated with her is what led me to actually research the term to find out exactly what it meant and what that meant in association to what she was writing and how she was writing. So Octavia Butler, she's a huge influence of mine. So uh, she is actually the one who introduced me to the term. Not
All
her
right,
in particular, but the description.
all right, and then the last question before we go into the questions I sent you. So since I mentioned Octavia Butler and you also read it too, I think my favorite Octavia Butler book probably is Wayward, and this is the one where there's two main characters. One is a shapeshifter, so she can change to different types of shapes.
Mhm.
The other one is someone who actually steals bodies. So he's kind of doesn't really have a body himself, but he leaps from body to body. And I always found that one to be both kind of a horror because that particular character was a very mean spirited character throughout the book, throughout just about the entire book. But it was
Yeah.
also really interesting. I thought it was like a very compelling, really quite tragic story of this woman and this man who's kind of going round and round in this kind of very violent at times dance. So for you, can you think of your Octavia Butler book that you thought was one of your favorites?
Well, it's the particular book that really drew me in was Parable of the Sower, and that's something that when you speak of the genre, when you speak of Octavia Butler, it's something that is but it is something that really captured me. I was just going over it recently. Um, I haven't read it in about 15 or 20 years. I just downloaded it into my queue. I'm about to dive back into it. But what I really like about her is the depth and the layers that she is able to infuse into her characters, not just in that book, but in others as well. She's a profound writer, uh, is how I would describe her.
Right, and actually, I totally agree too. I've read just about everything she's written, but now actually going to the questions that I sent you. And so I did read your bio even before I started the book, so I knew you did poetry. And so my first question is, what is your process of writing poetry?
Poetry for me, and naturally, it tends to come out, and I most everything I write tends to have the same pattern. I write iambic pentameter. I tend to speak in that pattern, so it's natural for me to write in that pattern. But poetry is happening around me all the time. I see it, and I can see poetry in the wind. I can hear it in the wind. I can feel it when I step outside in the morning, the chill in the air. So the process of writing poetry for me is just really listening to my experiences, to my influences, to what is happening around me. And the trick is to be able to capture it and to write it down. I craft poems and I can see like lines forming in my head uh, throughout the day. But if I don't have access to a pencil or a pen, well, I'm analog in that way. I need to have a pencil. I need to have paper to be able to sit down and to be able to write out my thoughts. Um, so poetry for me, the process of writing poetry is simply listening, being able to connect, and finding a way to actually translate that into the written word. And it's a process, and I love it. There's something that happens to me that I'm often not even aware of. I just kind of go with it. So poetry is
All right,
natural.
and the process of actually putting on the page though, so like you're walking around and you these poems or these lines are coming to you. So you're the kind of person, do you actually just speak them to your phone or do you actually have a pencil and paper, just having jot something down? What's the process of actually putting your poetry down on the page?
I try. I've been advised to utilize my technology, to utilize my phone, to speak these things into the phone, to utilize the notes app on my phone. But for me, it's just not the same. I need a pencil. I need a particular type of pen. I need paper. So I can hear it. I can hear the poetry. I can see the poetry around me, but many times it's a personal experience. It's something that will never be shared with anyone because I didn't have the opportunity to write it down. And my memory isn't as such that I'm going to craft a poem and then I'm going to be able to write it down later. These are fleeting opportunities. So yeah, I try to keep paper and pencil and I try to keep paper and a pen or a pencil with me at all times. I carry I got my old school gunslinger backpack. It's a leather beat up old bag that I carry with me all the time. I got my notebook. I got my paper in there. So I try to keep it handy. And when something really good strikes me, I have to stop and I have to get it down.
And then, so that's your process of writing poetry. What is your process of writing fiction, which is such a different kind of medium, I feel at least. I do both poetry and fiction. So, what's your
Yeah.
process of actually writing fiction?
Yes. The fiction is all based on ideas. And I tend to find inspiration and some of the strangest things. It could be a news report that I'm watching. It could be an article that I'm reading. It could be me observing something happening around me as I'm out in public. But the idea, the kernel of the idea, is where all of my stories start, and many of them I can see them. They're fleshed out in my dreams. So that requires me to be able to almost keep like a dream journal. So a lot of times I can see these ideas, I can see the story play out in my mind or while I'm dreaming in my subconscious. And if I can get up and just get it down in time, because there's a small window for me to be able to record it before it's gone, I can see the basis of it. And once I have the basis of a story, I know what the idea is. I have a good idea of what I want the story to say, how I want it to be presented. A lot of times I then dive into like the research. I spend a lot of time, many hours researching. I could write a 5-7 page short story that I spend dozens of hours researching just some of the smallest topics, because for me, it's important to be able to present my stories from a position of awareness. I want to be able to know what I'm talking about when I'm writing the story. I want it to be able to naturally connect with the narrative. So I spend a lot of time reading and researching and writing notes. I keep notebooks, and I just fill notebooks up with notes and just all these processes. And when I actually sit down to actually start writing, it all tends to flow. So I do the research. I dive into the research first, and then I do the writing.
So, for me, I started writing fiction first, and then I was actually very fortunate. I really mean that because I attended different programs for fiction, but there was like a poetry component to it. And these programs forced me to also write poetry from an early age. And so,
Yes.
even though I was more into fiction, I learned just the basics of the foundation of writing poetry, and then I picked it up really in the last probably 8 years. But for you, was it poetry you started writing first, and then fiction, or was it maybe both of you were doing it at the same time? Which one actually came to you first?
Definitely poetry. Poetry was, I was introduced to poetry um, at a really young age with the poets of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes in particular. I was given some of his poetry to read when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, and I just remember how much it struck me, how he was able to move me and impassion me with his words, and I could see the stories, could actually see the worlds that he was creating with just this small amount of words, the efficiency of his words. It all just really drew me in at a young age. And I just remember then I just knew that I was going to grow up to be Langston Hughes when I was young. But um, so it developed from there. What actually gave me the courage to pursue my passion, to actually believe in myself as a poet, as a writer, was I believe it was my junior year. My English teacher, she read something that I wrote, and she was really encouraging of me. And at the time, I needed that, and it was important to me. It was important for me to hear an authority figure tell me that this is good. You should look into doing this. You should keep doing this. Don't stop doing this. So I've been writing. I've been and I've been aligning myself with this since I was young.
Well, I have to admit, I haven't heard someone mention Langston Hughes in a very long time. I think we may be around the same age, but definitely he's someone that's not really mentioned very much. But his poems are extremely powerful. I still remember the book that I got from him maybe 20 years ago, and I swear I wish Langston Hughes was someone that was actually brought up more and more in the public sphere. But the third question, and I have a feeling I'm mispronouncing this name. I know you said me I got it right, but I feel like I'm saying it wrong. But so, what is Bealz about?
Bealz, and yeah, you're saying it correctly. Um, just to be clear, the character name Bealz is his nickname, and that's how he prefers to be referred to. Ultimately, the story Bealz, Prince of the Southside, is a story of a family's resilience in the face of extreme challenges, and it's Bealz represents the prototypical young black male, you know, being raised in harsh urban environments, and I it was important for me to craft the narrative based on what was familiar to me, what was familiar to my sons, my daughter, who were initially my first audience. I wrote this story with them in mind. I wanted them to have something that they could read, they can enjoy, they could recognize themselves in, and so I utilized a lot of familial histories and like real world histories and uh, mythologies, and I crafted them all into this tale of magic and mythology. So uh, it spans two worlds. Bealz, Prince of the Southside, is book one in a planned 3-book trilogy. I've written the second book. It is complete. Well, that's hyperbole. It's about 80% complete. It's mostly written. I just have to get it organized and edited, and that process for me takes just as long as writing it sometimes. But yeah, so that's what it is. It's an Afrofuturist adventure fantasy, and it hits the ground running.
I'm just curious. Do you remember? It may have been a long time ago, but do you remember the first scene you wrote of the book? So it doesn't have to be like the opening, like the actual opening of the book that exists today. But do you remember the first scene you wrote for Bealz?
The first scene that I wrote was actually The I want to say it's chapter 3. I'm not certain, but there's a scene. Excuse me. There's a scene where, excuse me, Bealz is the character himself. The story starts with him. He is in foster care, and he is basically estranged from his parents. His mother being drug addled and unable really to care for him, and his father is incarcerated and has been incarcerated since before he was born. So he's never had any physical contact with his father, but he often dreams of him. He often has moments of meditational like contact with his dad. So the first scene that I can remember writing was that moment where his father was sitting in his prison cell, but they were in like a dream state, and he was having a conversation with his son. So that was the first scene that I wrote.
All right. And then I think you kind of already answered how you conceive the idea of this novel. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more of it. But then also with that question, what was the most difficult part of writing the novel?
Well, most definitely for me, the most difficult part of writing the novel was actually writing the novel. You know, as I said, I am a poet. I self-identify, and I have self-identified as a poet for many, 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 many years. Uh, and it was about 15, 20 years ago or so, I got really comfortable with writing short stories. Excuse me. The first short story I wrote, I mentioned earlier, was read by that English teacher. But for me at the time, it wasn't my focus. For me, I saw my short stories basically as long form poems. It's just that I had more to say. I had a different structure in mind when I presented them. And a lot of my short stories tend to be thematic. They tend to have something to say um, uh, systemically, you know, as a critique. So transitioning from writing that short form prose, that fiction, to extending, you know, that idea over the course of an actual novel length manuscript, it is something that I really had to learn to do during the process of doing it. I can say as a first project, you know, Bealz was an educational experience for me. I've since written a couple more books. As I said, I did complete, or I'm in the process of completing book 2, but I also have 2 more manuscripts optioned for publication. One is an offshoot of the world that I created in Bealz, Prince of the Southside, and the other is more just literary fiction. But uh, it, so the difficult part for me was learning how to write this, learning how to structure this, and it's hard for me to focus like that, and the being able to complete the task. I was super proud of myself to be able to get through it. So that part for me, and then at the end of it, the editorial process, which for me seemed to drag on for years.
And so you've been writing poetry, I'm sure, for a very long time. So I'm sure you have many tips to get people who are actually interested in writing poetry. But if you could think of maybe the most important tip to get someone who's interested in writing poetry, improving their poetry, what have you, what would that tip be?
It would be to trust in yourself and to listen to yourself, listen to your inner voice. Um, Poetry, first and foremost, has to be written for you. You know, and it's something that for me it's a personal process. So being able to share poetry is a bonus. So first and foremost, you have to be able to attune yourself and align yourself with your inner voice and to be comfortable and interacting with yourself on that level, and being vulnerable on that level, so that you can be completely open and willing to share. And yeah, it's you have to be open and be ready to be vulnerable, because poetry will take you there.
And then along that same note, I actually taught for 16 years, about 16 years, and I was teaching English. I was in Asia, and whenever the kids were assigned a poem, it wasn't very often when they were assigned it, they hated it, because the thing about poetry is that it's extremely hard to understand. So you read a line, you read two lines, and then you like kind of give up on it because you can't really make sense of what's being written on the page. And so, what tip would you give in order to read poetry? Read means to understand poems. What tip would you give to someone to understand a poem?
Well, for me, it's difficult. I recall, having these moments with my own English professor. Um, but for me, poetry is like I said, is a very personal experience. As a poet, I write it and I present it, but it's okay for you as a reader to find your own meaning in the poem. So what I would my suggestion is to read poetry for your own understanding, to try to find your own understanding in the words, and not to be so uptight about what the poet meant as they wrote it. These are gifts that we present to the world, and you can take it and you can make of it as you choose.
And I'm going to change this last question, actually. We already talked about Octavia Butler, but can you give an example of another Afro-futuristic book that you thought was exemplary? And then, besides Octavia Butler, and then why do you think so?
What have I read recently? I'm trying to think of something that I read recently. I'm drawing a blank.
That's fine. If you can just think about it, then I know you probably already have one in mind. Fantasy, science fiction, or horror book that you felt was exemplary, and then why?
Oh yeah. Well, let's talk about one of the first fantasy books that I discovered when I was about 10, about 8, 9, 10 years old. One of my pastimes would be, as the other kids were out on the playground, I would like to wander the library in my school, where we wander up and down the shelves and look at books. And one of the first fantasy books that I read was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. And it really opened my eyes to the possibilities of the genre. It was completely different from anything that I had read at that point, up until that point. Excuse me. It was like I said, it was unlike anything I read. It introduced me at the time to like a level of creativity that I had not been aware of. So I credit her to that book and to sending me on my exploration for other fantasy.
All right, and that's actually it. So before we go, do you want to give a shout out mean to anyone, any organization, anything you have coming out? So you want to give a shout out?
Yeah, sure. Let's give a shout out to our publisher, Nightmare Press. Jacob Floyd is he's he's a hard working dude. He's really supportive, and I'm really appreciative of the effort that he's put into backing this project and into his commitment to me as a writer.
Yeah, I want to actually. Yeah, I want to second that actually. He doesn't have to do that. He can actually just publish his own books, but he actually decides to bring out other people's book into the world. And so it really is cool that he does that. So I too want to shout out Jacob for all the effort he puts into it. Because again, he doesn't have to do it, but he does do it. And that's really fantastic. So again, thank you, Gary, for joining me.
All right.
And that's it. So I'm gonna stop recording now.
Bealz's head swims. He lurches to his hands and knees and vomits violently. His eyes water painfully as he struggles to adjust to the bright light. Sitting back on his haunches, he rubs furiously at his face, trying to clear his vision while his heart races in panic and his breath quickens. He just watched his mother kill Miss Penny with a touch. And something else had happened. Something in his mother had changed, and then she brought them here. Bealz knows where he is. He recognizes it immediately. He's seen this sky before. He had smelled the air and felt the silken green golden grasses pressed down beneath him. This is the Encada, a dream world that can't possibly exist. It is supposed to be a mental trick, like the coping mechanisms the various DCFS-appointed counselors had taught him to use over the years. A place to escape to when things got too hard out in the real world. But this is no dream. This is no subconscious escape, no break from reality. This is real. His mother has brought him home. That other place, the dingy little room they had just stepped from, the filthy alleyways, the crowded bus stops, Deshawn and Dakari and Miss Penny, and the hellishness of a life lived on the south side of Chicago. That was the dream. Bealz somehow knew it all along. Still, and despite the familiarity he feels here in his spirit, his body, and all his senses scream out in alarm, disoriented by the slightly different mix of gases in the air, the vibrant colors swirling through the grasses, and the stronger pull of the Encada's gravity. Everything is so much like Earth, but nothing is the same.